in my brief eavesdropping, it seemed like the conversations were very rich and very animated. So thank you so much for the energy and time you put into it. I think that's very much a reflection of the passion that all of us feel for where we live and the great fortune, the great good fortune we have to live here and be an active part of it. And of course, much of the reason that we are blessed to live in this extraordinary place is the federal lands which surround us. And in a similar blessing, we have 4 extraordinary individuals who are in charge of the federal lands which we get to share with our fellow community members and the world at large. And it was pointed out to me in past years by one of the panelists currently up here that there might have been a little bit of gender inequity by not having women go first. And so because we're flexible, as a middle-aged white guy, I'm exceptionally flexible. I thought I would try to rectify that. And so what we'll have now is our 4 federal land managers, Tricia O'Connor, David Vella, Pat Kenny, and Brian Glassbell, each talk for about 10-15 minutes about the state of their jurisdictions. And then we will have a question and answer session open up to the room. We'll break for lunch after that. So that's what you can expect for the next hour or so. So without further ado, Tricia.
As I recall, it was actually that I was tired of having to go after the 2 most eloquent speakers in the room. So once again, I really appreciate being able to get up here and be part of this conversation, because it is really, really important for this opportunity to have these conversations. I am going to start out going backwards a little bit. And this week, the Oregonian published a forest ranger examination. Look at this online. It's totally awesome. This was from 1925, what it would take to pass the test to become a forest ranger. And I failed miserably when I took this test. Actually, first off, I failed because in 1925, I couldn't have been a forest ranger because of my sex. So I'm so glad things have changed since then. But there were questions on here like, if you're going to be packing into the wilderness for a week, how many pounds of flour would you bring with you, you and your 3 companions? Don't know that answer. So really interesting to kind of look back. But it did make me reflect on a little bit, thinking about Gifford Pinchot, who was the first chief of the Forest Service. And he really laid out a vision for our agency around sustaining conservation for the long term. These are America's public lands for all Americans, and that the greatest good for the greatest number of people in the long run. And those words still resonate today, I feel like. And he, if you don't know anything about Gifford Pinchot, amazing man, but really had this vision of forests and grasslands in this nation for the long run. And he also, when he set his rangers forth, the ones that were on horses and mules back in the day, had a series of maxims that he gave. And I have a couple that I would read because I actually think some of these, while they are a little amusing, do still resonate to me today. The first one is: a public official is there to serve the public and not to run them. Public support of things affecting public rights is absolutely required. I do agree with that one. It is more trouble to consult the public than to ignore them, but that's your job. It's my job. Don't try any sly or foxy politics. You're a forester, not a politician. I like that one. And then don't make enemies unnecessarily or for trivial reasons. If you are any good, you will make plenty of them on your own. Especially with matters of straight and honest public policy. And you need all the support you can get. I really do think some of those do still resonate today. So the Bridger Teton National Forest, just a couple of facts to get everybody on the same page of what that landscape is. 3.4 million acres from Yellowstone down to Kemmerer. So a pretty large landscape. Our budget annually is about $15 million. Really not that much money for that landscape. And we do augment that with a lot of work with partners and volunteers. And so I can't say enough about how much work others do to help us do our job. The forest is about 28% wilderness, designated wilderness of 3 large wilderness areas that we have. And then a couple of other things I'd mention. So we have about 100 employees permanently, and then or 150 permanent employees and about 100 in the summer that do a lot of the work that we get done out there. On the forest, we do have one of the highest programs of doing what we call special use authorization, and that's really permitting businesses to do business on the forest. We have one of the highest numbers in the nation on any national forest. And so that's things like outfitter and guides, the river guides on the Snake River, lodges, ski areas, all those things that the public really likes to do on their lands. And so we are pretty busy doing a lot of that. We have 2,200 miles of trail on the forest. And about 1,500 miles of roads. And that is really how people access the forest. So pretty important infrastructure that we have. And then a few other things we have: 3 ski areas, 37 campgrounds, lots of recreation potential here. And then I would say we also have a strong program in helping and supporting communities. And when I link back into the values piece, I really do believe the Forest Service, for its entire inception, has been all about working with communities, supporting communities, and whether that is being a backdrop for the community, for recreation, for sustenance, for all those things, or whether it's for job creation. And I would say the Bridger Teton does have a lot of jobs that happen on the National Forest. And so communities are really important to us. I guess I would kind of want to dive in a little bit to talk about some changes that have been happening and how that might translate into things that are different on the Bridger Teton. Since last year, a year ago when I was here, we do have a Secretary of Agriculture, and remind people that the Forest Service is under the Department of Agriculture. Sonny Perdue is the Secretary of Agriculture. Secretary Perdue has laid out a vision of USDA being one USDA. You may have heard this in the media. What I believe that means is more at the higher levels in terms of policies and being one agency that is more efficient. Not so much that we're going to not be the Forest Service or we're not going to be NRCS. And so I think that's his vision. He's also very strong about customer service, and he has laid out a vision of impeccable customer service throughout USDA. So those are just a couple of things that we're seeing. We also have a new chief of the Forest Service, Tony Took. And Tony Took is a career Forest Service employee. And Tony, our chief, has laid out 5 very clear priorities for the agency. And what encouraged me from his priorities, that these really do align with what we've been doing on the Bridger Teton very well. So his priorities are around empowering employees, and uplifting employees so that we have an organization that is inclusive and does not tolerate harassment, that we increase partnerships and volunteers, that we enhance recreation opportunities, that we are really good neighbors and we have impeccable customer service. And his last priority is around improving conditions of forest and grasslands, especially in those places where fire and the lack of fire has had a huge impact. And so if you think about all of those really are priorities that we have dealt with and are continue to deal with on the Bridger Teton as well. The other thing I would say our chief is very much interested in is, and I think you see this throughout government right now, is how can we become less of a burden to the public that we serve? How can we streamline regulations and so it becomes simpler to do business? And so the Forest Service right now is embarking on a couple of key areas in that realm. One is to try to figure out how we can be more efficient and effective in how we do environmental analysis and decision making. We all know that we spend a lot of time doing that. Less time, in my opinion, personally, if we could spend less time doing that and more time out there on the ground working with people, we would probably make better decisions. So that's really key. And then modernizing some of our other things like special use authorizations, timber sales. Some of those, the directives we have are 30, 40 years old. It's time to update those. So we're in the process of doing that. Another piece I would mention is all of us federal land managers get together in the Greater Yellowstone Coordinating Committee, And we have been talking about, really thinking about a couple of key priorities that we're working on. One of them, which I think you'll probably hear resonate throughout this group, is around increased visitation. What are the impacts of that, and how are we addressing that over the long term? So that's one key area, and the other key area is around wildlife migrations. We all know how important that is to this ecosystem. And I think we've even talked about how those two things intersect. How do people and wildlife intersect in this landscape that we have? And so you will start seeing us talking about those more and more. I guess the other thing I would talk about is in terms of the Bridger Teton. One of the things that we are seeing is it really doesn't matter what the issue is. It does just seems like they are more and more complex every year. And whether it's how we incorporate climate change in the things that we're thinking about, and whether it's around this increased expectations from the public around recreation, visitor use. And so we continue to work really hard on trying to find really good solutions for pretty complex problems. This year, and those problems range from, by Pinedale, we have one of the largest grazing allotments in the lower 48, and that's the Upper Green grazing allotment, which we're right in the middle of an EIS on. Pretty complex system, not an easy solution there. Still working on that one. Or locally, we have Teton Pass. How do we balance skier use and avalanche potential in closing the highway? We have a lot of unregulated camping going around. Everyone in town knows about this. Shadow Mountain, Spread Creek, Curtis Canyon. The list keeps getting longer of how we have people living out on the forest in the summer. We can't do these solutions in a vacuum. And so we are continuing to work to figure out, are there ways to have really good collaborative conversations and potentially come up with better solutions than we would just do on our own. I guess what I would kind of end with is a little discussion about maybe some successes that I have seen out there, and then some of our core values and some things to leave you with. So one thing I would mention is the power of collaboration. About a year and a half ago, the governor of Wyoming funded some seed money in Sublette County and Lincoln County, just south of here, for some collaborative groups. And I'd like to just mention the Sublette Collaborative just as an example of the power of collaboration. That group's only been together about a year or so, but they put their heads together, have come up with some landscape level treatments for aspen regeneration, for mule deer habitat enhancement, a couple of others trying to reduce the fire risk around some upper Hobart Canyon ranches. And by God, they did that. They put in for a grant this year, and $500,000 later, they're ready to go. And so I really do believe that it's a good example of how if we ever people work together, we can sometimes come up with really good solutions and actually get funded to do it. So a great example. Coming back to what I would define as our core values in the Forest Service, this was actually not an easy thing to think about. But some of the things that came to my mind, which actually mirrored, I think, some of the things that we talked about at our table, were around we are stewards of the nation's forests and grasslands. And I do think that as public land managers, we really take that to heart, and it's one of our core values. We believe in public service and good customer service. I really do believe that it comes back to this communities, and that we really believe and value thriving, sustainable communities. And I also believe that we are a science-based organization that really does value the science that can help define and defend our decisions. I think there probably are a lot of other values, and if I'd polled my employees, I probably would have some different ones, but those seem to, from my perspective, really define the Forest Service and the employees that work with us. So as you reflect on these things that I've mentioned, I guess we are in a time of a lot of change and a lot of, I would say, uncertainty. And I am choosing, as a federal land manager at this level, at the forest level, to really focus on what's the power that we have locally, and how do we better come together to collaborate to figure out our own solutions. And so I really feel like that is still within our power, and that we have a lot of I guess, future if we think and continue to work that way. The other thing I would leave you with is it is a great time of change. And I would say that certainly the employees of the Bridger Teton really feel that. I know the public feels that. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. And I come back to a couple of things I would leave you all with to think about. And I keep telling employees this. You really need to be kind and be professional. We really need to listen. We need to listen to other perspectives and really listen and be curious. I really encourage all of us to still be engaged. It's the only way we're going to have this kind of dialogue and work through these, complex, thorny issues that we have out there in natural resource management. And then the thing I would leave you all with is really continue. You all, one of the values in this community that's loud and clear is the value of public lands surrounding this place. And so I just encourage us all to continue to care about those public lands, because I do think the caring, whether that comes in different values that may conflict at times, it really helps provide that platform for us to have the sustainable future that we all want. Thank you, and I will turn it over to Dave.
First, thank you so much for your excellent, much appreciated service. I'm wondering if you would be willing to give us an honest assessment about how the current administration's policy on climate change is translating into what happens with the allocation of resources, the focus of research, and the link between science and decision making at your jurisdictions. And if you are willing, please do. And maybe we can tell the journalists of the room to turn off their machines.
That's right. We'll give it all to Dan. So I can speak briefly from the Forest Service perspective. And at our level, we are still, so one of the things I did not mention is that we are potentially going to embark on our forest plan revision process potentially next year. And a big part of that is looking at the effects of climate. And so we are in the midst of working within our region on a climate assessment strategy. And so what I would say from my perspective is that we continue, it's a very important issue within the Forest Service. It's a very important issue in the relationship with climate and fire in our agency. And that has not changed from what I am seeing, at least at the level I am at.
This actually probably follows up a little bit with what Franz asked. And I was going to ask David specifically, but all of you have one or two or three very popular destinations at Jenny Lake, July and August. Do we pave more sagebrush over so there's sufficient parking, or am I now going to share that hike into String Lake with 200 more people, whether it's Granite Hot Springs or whether it's Old Faithful or any of the popular spots? What's your particular view on it?
I'd add to that, and I'm just thinking about, I threw out Teton Pass as one of our examples of, and the questions that we have to think about are, infrastructure, in that case, parking really drives how many people can get up there at one given time. And so, we're asked that why don't you just increase parking so you can have more people? And it comes into this, a lot of the hardest questions to figure out is what's the visitor experience that you're trying to manage for, and how do you provide for that? And one person's crowding is another person's wilderness. And so trying to, I think we're all seeing that, and the social science data sometimes really surprises us with what the average person's experience is. But we also have an interest in providing that range, but maybe not on the same piece of ground. So I think those are things that all come into play with that.
Hi. First off, thank you for sharing all your information and being accessible to us. My question is around future pending government shutdowns, what they might look like for you, and if they're potentially any different than previous shutdowns under the previous administration.
Within our agency, interestingly enough, we haven't seen a whole lot that has come down. And so my guess it's going to be similar to what happened last time in the Forest Service, which was, employees went home, but the forests were still open to the public. I think the only place we come into some interesting issues are around when we have contractors or uses on the forest, i.e. Jackson Hole Mountain Resorts, Snow King, their operations, which, as far as I can see so far, would still continue to go for at least a while. So that, I don't think we're going to see a whole lot change.
I'm going to throw in one word on that. Right before the last shutdown, whenever that, or potential shutdown, I was talking to Dan Wank, and he was late getting on the call because he was in a planning meeting because they were planning, I don't know how many, the point is I don't know how many man hours you people are putting into silliness of the highest order. Your budgets are, I mean, that was an extraordinary number, about 50% more, but more people and no more money. And Tricia, I can't imagine your budget's in any better shape. What a profound waste of human energy, and what tremendous disregard for you people as public officials. And I'm so sorry to hear that. I would like to ask each of you to just one last word. What is one thing that you would like to leave folks with? What is the one big thing? And for you other future speakers, that's a little foreshadowing, as they say in English scholarship, of what I'll be asking of you as well. But if you just leave us with one thing.
Just the power of collaboration and positive thinking.